Everyone to our second conference day of 2026. And the theme today is neurodiversity and adulthood, which covers the psychological advocacy and social advocacy. I will be the chair today, and my name is Dr. Mitchell. In terms of Laura's background, she is our current Virtual Learning Environment Intern at SPED Awareness. She also has a background of being a university lecturer of psychology and business at the Global Banking School. She also has experience as a freelance service delivery specialist, providing coaching to parents of neurodivergent children, which is highly relevant with today's topic of presentation, and also has experience as a specialist mental health mentor in autism. So it gives me great pleasure to firstly invite Laura to present her presentation.
Hello and welcome to my presentation on understanding neurodivergent parenting. This is a research-informed session for you guys, and it looks at the lived experiences of parents with ADHD and autism. We'll look at the challenges, the strengths, and also those practical implications. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to define neurodivergence and distinguish between ADHD and autism using neurodiversity affirming language in your own professional communications. Also, you'll be able to apply current research evidence to identify and explain key challenges neurodivergent parents face, including executive functioning demands, sensory overload, mental health impacts, and those systematic barriers. Then you'll hopefully be able to analyse the unique parenting strengths of neurodivergent parents, including the similarity fit hypothesis, and compare these with deficit-focused professional narratives. And lastly, hopefully you'll be able to evaluate at least one way your professional practice could become more neurodivergent affirming and commit to one specific actionable change you will apply after this session. So first, we'll look at what we mean by neurodivergence. So we'll have a look at the neurodiversity framework. So it refers to the natural variation in human brain function and behavioural traits. It was coined by the sociologist Judy Singer in 1998, and it frames conditions like ADHD and autism as differences rather than deficits. And that's a key point that we want to hold in our minds. But the neurodivergent individual experiences the world more intensely, so things feel a little bit more powerful to them. They register more sensory information, they process the world a bit differently, and they interact in ways that are divergent and different from neurotypical norms. And this shift that we're trying to move from the deficit to difference is not academic semantics. It's not just how we speak about it. It has direct implications for how practitioners, so you and I, write reports, how we discuss families that we work with, and also how we design that support. So let's now move to look at ADHD, so the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which looks at differences in attention regulation, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. It also gives us challenges with executive functioning, so differences in planning, organisation, and time management. And it's becoming increasingly understood as an attention regulation difference within the neurodiversity paradigm. But when we think about autistic spectrum disorder or condition, these are differences in social communication and interaction. So they navigate the world slightly differently to neurotypical people. It's focused on interest and adherence to routine. And then they can also experience heightened sensory sensitivity. So they process the world more intensely. So think about sound, touch, taste. And 40 to 70% of autistic children also have ADHD. And as we go through this, guys, I'm hoping at the end we'll have time to do a quick Kahoot. So take notice of these dates and information. So we've looked at the two conditions. So now we're going to look at neurodivergent parents. So 1 in 5 adults have a neurodevelopmental condition, which means possibly 1 in 5 parents as well. 40 to 70% of autistic children also have ADHD, so they co-occur together. And there's a 50% heritability of autism and ADHD traits that we know of at the moment, but obviously as we get more information from research that might change. And then we look at late diagnosis. So many parents identify only after the child has been diagnosed. So the late diagnosis phenomenon. There's a significant portion of parents, particularly mothers, who don't receive a diagnosis until their own child has been identified as neurodivergent. So these parents have been working and navigating life without a framework to understand their own neurology. So what they do is they tend to internalise these struggles as personal failings, but this diagnosis can bring relief alongside grief over past experiences once they have been diagnosed. So reassessment of parenting decisions, they can see life and the way they parent through a new lens. So now we'll look at the gender diagnosis and disparity. So ADHD and autism are historically underdiagnosed in women and girls due to their masking behaviours, so how women and girls are socialised. They're able to conceal those neurodivergent traits. And then we look at the diagnostic criteria, which is developed predominantly on male cohorts. And then you've got the societal expectations of coping and emotional management that are placed on girls more so than on males. And there's limited clinician awareness of female presentations. So because it's mainly studied in male cohorts, we don't tend to have the information spread on how women present. So this directly shapes parenting experiences and their help-seeking behaviour. So challenge 1, we're going to look at executive functioning and demands. So parenting is fundamentally an executive function task. So think about getting up in the mornings, getting the children ready for school, packing lunch. So for ADHD parents or parents with autism, the cognitive demands of caregiving can overwhelm an already stretched executive resource. So let's look at organisation and planning. So missing school forms, so school trips. Sometimes you also get letters for healthcare that can happen at school, medical appointments that are outside of school, and just those daily tasks. So they will may have difficulty holding multiple demands in their working memory simultaneously. Next, we've got time management. We can underestimate the amount of time that a task might take. So therefore we're late for school pickup, drop off, appointments. And then that difficulty between transitioning between activities. So finishing work and then getting to the school pickup, or dropping the child to school and then transitioning to the next activity that the parent might be doing. Time blindness is particularly pronounced in ADHD, which then can cause stress for the parent. We've got task initiation and flexibility. So difficulty starting tasks when not internally motivated. And if the person has autism, then they may have that rigidity in routine, and that can clash with the unpredictability of child rearing. Think about a child not sleeping at night, not getting ready for school, and all those kinds of situations. So when we think about working memory, you might forget instructions halfway through the task. And then imagine that with the stress of a child as well on top. There may be difficulty in multi-step routines. And then think about that executive function again. So those difficulties are well documented with individuals with ADHD and autism. A big one here next is emotional regulation. So people with autism and ADHD tend to have a lower frustration tolerance, especially when they're under cognitive load. So that may lead to parental dysregulation, and this can then amplify the child's emotional difficulties as well. And lastly, we've got cognitive load and burnout. So parenting actually drains executive resources, and then it might leave you with an empty tank. So you might feel depleted, and so you might have depleted self-regulation by the end of the day. Hopefully you're all following along. I can't see any hands up, so I'll keep moving on. So next challenge 2 is challenge 2, where we look at mental health and sensory overload. So we've got the mental health impacts. So parents of autistic children tend to feel stress well above the mean. So if with autistic parents, it's 116.7 above that threshold of 91. For neurotypical parents, we're well below that threshold of 67.2. And this was taken from a sample of Mexican parents. And there was 211. And it was looked at parents with children between 3 and 5. So autistic women face higher rates of postpartum depression and anxiety and that sensory overload in the perinatal period. and this can increase risks of burnout. And many autistic mothers go without diagnosis, and those ones internalise their struggles and see them as personal failings. And this can then lead to isolation and reluctance to seek help. And also depression is prevalent amongst parents of autistic children. So the confidant and that social support significantly reduces both stress and rumination. So it's a double trouble, really. So as an autistic mother, you might then internalise these struggles and not seek help. But if you were to seek help, then it can help to reduce that stress and that rumination that you have. Now, looking at the sensory demands of parenthood. So parenthood dramatically increases daily sensory overload. Think of the noise the children make, whether it's crying or laughing or screaming, the touch, they're constantly wanting to be touched, to be cuddled, to be held, the different smells, whether that's just cooking the baby food or it could be other things that children are quite smelly. And then the visual chaos as well. Think of the toys everywhere or the different colours, even that comes with parenting in childhood, even to the TV programmes. And these sensory demands increase, so the parents need access to self-regulation strategies, and this can help decrease instead of compounding a spiral. And then the physical contact with young children can be deeply dysregulating, especially for sensory sensitive parents. And if you've got young children between 3 and 5 that are not in school yet, you're going to have this sensory overload probably, I'll probably say 18 hours out of the day. So I can see how people will become dysregulated. And then you've got the sensory overload. It can lead to a shorter fuse. The parent can become withdrawn, and then they can have difficulty responding to the child's emotional needs. And then the home environment can be looked at as a clinical factor. So the noise, the clutter, the unpredictability can all shape that parenting availability. So that will lead to the parent withdrawing again. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. So next we've got challenge 3, where we look at the social and systematic barriers. So you've got social isolation, so difficulty navigating neurotypical parenting spaces. So communication differences can make it difficult to form support networks. So think about the school gates, school parties, after school clubs. They may find it difficult to interact and communicate with parents in those kind of situations. Accessing support services, so navigating bureaucratic systems is an executive function challenge. Think about those phone calls, the forms, the referrals. They're disproportionately difficult for neurodiverse parents. Then overcoming that stigma and scrutiny. So differences in parenting presentation can be misread as an inadequacy by professionals unfamiliar with neurodivergent expression. And the school system demands, which is quite communication heavy. Think about the emails, the letters, even the breakfast clubs. So communication heavy environments, so parents evening group chats, they place high demand on executive function, and that may lead the parent to disengage and becoming disinterested. So now we look at managing your own needs versus your child's needs. So when parents and children are both neurodivergent, they may share dysregulation, and this can be intense and hard to navigate alone. And then we've got the financial and employment impact. So financial stress, burnout, and the children's need can reduce the employment capacity. Can I take on more stress? So then the income level can be significantly reduced, and it moderates the parental well-being. So we've looked at the challenges. So now let's look at the strength. So neurodivergence is not just a challenge to manage. It's also a set of capabilities that can be profoundly enhanced by the parenting relationship. So neurodiverse parents come with a unique set of assets. So we've got that deep empathy and attunement. So many divergent parents demonstrate heightened emotional attunement. So this is that double empathy framework, and it suggests that communication is richer between neurologically similar individuals. And then you've got structure and predictability. Autistic parents frequently create highly structured, predictable home environments. So all children benefit from that consistency, and neurodivergent children particularly so. The creativity and divergent thinking. So ADHD is associated with creative associated thinking. So neurodivergent parents often find imaginative, non-conventional ways to engage, play and problem solve, and this can strengthen that parent-child relationship. We've got hyperfocus. It can also be a strength. So when interests and motivation align, ADHD-related hyperfocus enables parents to be deeply present, researching their child's needs, and to be a strong advocate for their children too. And we've got that authentic advocacy. So having navigated systems themselves, neurodivergent parents are often fierce, informed advocates with lived understanding that many professionals lack, and they can use that to help their child get what they need as well. And then modelling resilience. So children who observe parents coping with neurodivergence learn powerful lessons in self-acceptance, resilience, and the normalisation of difference. So as much as we get challenges with neurodivergent, it can also come with many strengths. So now we'll look at the similarity fit hypothesis. So this hypothesis proposes that when children and parents share neurodevelopmental traits, the parent-child relationship may benefit from greater behavioural compatibility and mutual understanding, because we both navigate the world in a similar way. And the important nuance in this is that the original paper found that effort for mothers, but a similarity misfit for fathers. But these effects vary by gender, age, and the outcome measured. So Wessler in 2025 looked at the mother-child autism trait similarity, and this positively predicted children's social functioning and psychological well-being at 3 years old. And also mother-child ADHD similarity also predicted social functioning. So this mirrors a double empathy concept. So communication and rapport is enhanced when individuals share a neurotype, challenging the assumption that neurodivergent parenting is inherently less effective. So having someone just like me can be good for the child as well. So the practical implication here is that having that shared neurotype between parent and child may be protective, directly challenging that deficit-based professional assessment of neurodivergent families. And here you've got that study note. So if you want to check that out, you can. But there's one caveat. When neurotypes diverge, mismatched parent-child traits may increase their stress. So that might require some additional professional support. So now we'll move on to look at how neurodivergent parenting shapes a child's outcome. So you've got that risk pathway. Parental stress and child behaviour are transactionally related. So each predicts the other over time. So a stressed parent may create a stressed child, and stressed child may stress out the parent. Children of highly stressed neurodivergent parents show elevated internalising and externalising problems. And parental emotional dysregulation interrupts that co-regulation. Children rely on their parents for emotional development. So if a parent can't manage their own emotions, it's going to be difficult for the child to learn those skills and for the parent to regulate them as well. Shared dysregulation, a parent and child simultaneously overwhelmed, can be particularly intense in neurodivergent parents, and a child's sleep disruption is a key predictor of maternal mental health decline in autism. Okay, so we've looked at the risk pathways. Let's look at those protective pathways. Parental resilience, that independently buffers against child behavioural problems, and it can be a primary intervention target. So if we can make the parent more resilient, then that can help with the child's behavioural issues. Confidant social support is the strongest single predictor of reduced parenting stress across ADHD and autism groups. So we need to help the ADHD parents and autistic parents to create social supports and have those networks around them. Mother-child neurotype similarity predicts better social functioning and psychological well-being with children at 3 years old. And parents who understand their own neurodivergence show greater self-compassion and more adaptive coping. And if that parent can show self-compassion to themselves, then the child is going to learn that too. And neurodivergent parents who model acceptance support children in developing stronger identity and self-esteem. So yeah, it just creates a more pleasant environment for the children, and a more accepting one too. So let's look at parenting stress. What does the research show? So we looked at it before, but here's a visual. So all autism parents, the mean is well above the threshold of 91. ADHD parents is just below, and then neurotypical parents are in that functioning range. 100% of autistic and ADHD parents use emotion-focused coping versus 94% of neurotypical parents who use problem-focused coping. Why is that important? Because with emotion-focused coping, we look at emotions and how that impacts me, whereas looking at problem-focused coping is looking at the problem and solving the problem. So the confidant social support is the strongest predictor of stress reduction, and then we've got the effect size there. So what can we as practitioners do differently? We can adopt a strength-based lens, so move beyond looking at just the deficits of neurodivergent parents, and let's acknowledge what they do well. So advocacy, attunement to their children, and the deep knowledge of their child. And this reframing can help build a therapeutic alliance. We can adapt our communication style, so offer written summaries, use clear, direct language, and avoid jargon and metaphors. Allow processing time for individuals and communication differences, and look at that disengagement. Where is that coming from? And also don't take the withdrawal as disengagement. It might just be that processing. Consider the sensory environment. So assess the home as a clinical variable. If it's chaotic, highly stimulated, it may dysregulate a sensory sensitive parent. So that might directly shape their parenting availability. Also build that social support infrastructure. So facilitate neurodivergent specific peer support. Confidant support is the most powerful predictor, probably the fourth time I've said it in this presentation. Neurotypical programs can create additional exclusions, and then support late diagnosed parents. So provide that psychoeducation, support grief processing, reframe past parenting through the correct lens. Late diagnosis without support intensifies guilt and self-blame. We want to avoid that. And then scaffold the system navigation. So have proactive support. We don't want passive signposting. But neurodivergent parents face disproportionate difficulty with referrals, form completion, and advocating within systems. So let's give them the support that they need. Now we'll look at screening, assessment, and early intervention. So critical screening gaps. So enhanced screening for ADHD and autism is needed in parents presenting with postpartum depression or anxiety, and that convergent of these conditions is poorly recognised clinically. But the fear of professional judgment may lead neurodivergent parents to conceal their struggles. Routine, non-stigmatising screening creates safer disclosure. If we're looking at health visitors, midwives and perinatal teams, they're critical as a first point of contact and require neurodiversity training. And a child's diagnosis should routinely prompt inquiry about a parent's neurodivergent. It is known as the familial pathway. So effective intervention principles. So neurodivergent affirming parenting programs, not forcing neurotypical scripts onto different brains. There is research, but I can't remember who did it, that says that the neurodivergent training is much worse for neurotypical training is much worse for neurodivergent parents. So we need to really tailor it to the neurodivergent individuals. Fair family-centred whole system approaches that address parent and child needs concurrently. So we look at the whole family as one unit, and we can build parental resilience as a primary intervention. So because we know that resilience moderates child outcomes independently, and we can support co-regulation with the dyad regulating the parent's nervous system is a route to the child's well-being, and peer support and psychoeducation reduce isolation and improve coping. So critical given that's critical, given those systematic barriers that we discussed earlier. So let's reflect. I don't know if we've got time to do this, but if you want, you can think about thinking of a neurodivergent parent that you've worked with or that you've come across. What strengths did they demonstrate that may not have been explicitly recognised in a professional assessment or report? So think about advocacy, structure, attunement, lived understanding of their child's experience. And if you're not clinicians or if you've not worked in this kind of environment, you might have a friend, you might even be neurodivergent yourself, and hopefully this has resonated with you. But question 2, in what ways might current professional systems, referral processes, group programs and communication styles inadvertently disadvantage neurodivergent parents? So think about form completion, phone calls, open group settings, indirect language and communications. And question 3, what one specific actionable change will you apply in your own practice or life after today to be more neurodivergent affirming when working with parents? Name it clearly. I want it so clear that you could evaluate in 4 weeks' time. So this is your smart commitment to change. So hopefully you've got that, and I can send these slides out to whoever wants them. So key takeaways from today. Neurodivergence describes a natural cognitive diversity. It's not a pathology. Language and framing matter profoundly in professional practice. Parenting stress is significantly elevated in neurodivergent parent groups and is modifiable through social support. Shared neurotype between mother and child may be a protective factor. The similarity fit hypothesis directly challenges the deficit narrative about neurodivergent families. Late diagnosis is the norm, not the exception. So practitioners must address self-understanding alongside parenting skills. And lastly, practitioners must adapt their systems, not expect neurodivergent parents to conform to neurotypical professional environments. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura. So we are going to enter our applause phase. When I count down to 0, feel free to either applaud physically or virtually, or if it's a bit too stimulating, feel free to take a step away for 10 seconds. And we will begin the applause phase in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic indeed. So do we have any questions for Laura or reflections? Yes, Rowan.
Just reflections as well. I mean, thank you, Laura. It was a brilliant presentation. It was really interesting and really well and excessively worded. But having worked as a Senko previously, a lot of that stuff resonated. And also I think, just in terms of appointments, there's with delays and waiting lists and people not explaining what appointments are for, and forgetting an appointment with not giving reminders and forgetting one appointment and then having to wait 3-6 months for another one. They're going to appointments and not knowing who they're seeing. So people come in, or coming in and they're going and doing assessments and they don't know what they're for. They've not been explained properly. So there's an awful lot of barriers for parents. And then I think something that's not acknowledged enough is parents' lived experiences, so they can really relate to their child, but that's not taken on board. And sometimes the relationship that they have or things that they do is based on their lived experience, their knowledge of their child and the knowledge of their dynamic, but it might not match what a professional is perhaps suggesting.
Yeah, and it's good to see it from an actual practitioner's point of view. And yeah, the barriers are real.
And Kirsty has also mentioned a really interesting thank you. And thank you, Rowan, for your reflection. I do have a reflection, which turns into a question somewhat, but I'll start off with the reflective bit. So I did find it really insightful, and especially talking about the experience of essentially thinking about neurodivergent parenting as a whole, because I do agree with you. In the clinical world, it is something that gets forgotten when we're going through the process of assessing people who are neurodivergent. And it's interesting because it does make me wonder in terms of how we can sort of increase the potential for that sort of parental involvement / parental screening. Is it ethical? Is it something that we should do naturally as part of the process? So yeah, I was just wondering your thoughts in regards to, should we make it sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of mandatory that if we're going to assess young people for neurodivergency, should we also assess the parents and essentially, as it were, kill two birds with one stone, metaphorically speaking?
I think you should give parents the choice. So give them information. Or did you know that 50%, or this is a heritable condition, 50% of parents have it if the child has it. Would you like to be screened? And just give them that choice. They might say no, they might say yes, but at least you've given that information. And then if they choose not to at that time, they might come back a bit later, might be years later, but at least they've been told. Whereas at the moment, they don't know.
True. Yes, very true indeed. I like what you mentioned about that autonomy and sometimes giving them time, because it is true. Sometimes, like you mentioned in your talk about the grief process, sometimes it can be even a grief process alone for the parent in terms of the child being neurodivergent, but also that relief of, okay, this is what they're experiencing, but also grief for the parent themselves in terms of that acknowledgement. So yeah, indeed, time. I really like that. So thank you. To another round of applause phase again. So feel free to applaud physically, virtually, or distance yourself if a bit stimulating. In 3, 2, 1. Fantastic.